Good day and welcome. I'm really delighted to, although it's from a distance, to talk to you on the seminar on water resource management in Bogota. I've recorded this presentation. I really regret I cannot shake hands with you and talk and meet face to face, but anyhow, technology offers us a second best solution. I've been invited to talk about water resource management, and typically it's of course a very important topic, but mainly to focus on two topics: on green water management, on saving water, retaining water with a technique called 3R. We use the entire landscape, and also to talk about water saving and the things that are possible and the things that drive it, and then in the end come up with a number of suggestions that might be considered in Colombia. And like I say, I hope we have another opportunity to discuss that in more detail. My name is Frank van Steenbergen. I'm the director of Meta Meta. Meta Meta is an organization which works in about 20 countries in the world and is actively trying to promote better water resource management, and particularly on the more cutting edge and innovative side of things. My email is there, and it's there for the reason that I hope that some of you will be in touch with me. Short background, yeah. I think we all know this, but I would like to put it a little bit in a specific perspective. Of course, there's more and more pressure on our water resources, particularly on groundwater. You can see that from this graph, where the blue line is, this is a large area in India. The blue line sort of goes up and down, and it shows the consumption of surface water. The red line is groundwater, and that is just increasing steadily. And this is a trend. This was a resource we didn't use that much before, but also we're using it increasingly. Of course, the picture is different in different parts of the world, but it's really a sign of our increasing use of our scarce water resources. Then the other important drivers that you can see all over the world. Cities grow, cities require water, so they influence the way water is being managed. And of course, we have climate change. I think for a long time, many of us were skeptics, but I think we all see more and more unusual events, and often they, in terms of water, they translate in much longer and ill-timed droughts and flooding events. And I think it's also a major driver for water resource management. I'll later come to it, that I think there's another reason, strong link between climate change and water resource management on the positive side. So this increased water use has brought us so many benefits. We should not forget that. We sometimes are in a sort of crisis mode. We talk, but I think without the increased use of water in the last decades, even though our population economies have grown tremendously compared to any other period of time in history, we have been able to address food security, to reduce food insecurity. We see all over the world more high-value agriculture, more horticulture. Our consumption patterns are changing. We see water being used even for inland fisheries. We also see, of course, the importance of water source for safe drinking water, supply for households and industries, and we although we still haven't achieved the sort of full coverage, but definitely impressive progress has been made. Yeah. But demands increase, and of course the largest demand is from agriculture, and I want to take you through that a little bit. That we know that if we project 2005 into 2050, still the demand for food will increase with 60%, and that means probably a 70% increase in water use if we don't change. And this increase is very much caused by a rising population, but also the fact that we eat more calories, and then at the same time we eat more items that have less calories. And then also we have something which I think we can witness all over the world. In some areas, the revolution is completed. In other areas, it's still about to start. But our whole food distribution changes, and the more higher water quality standards, there's more demand for uniformity. In agricultural produce, we eat more vegetables. We want products throughout the year, and all of this means that we are starting to use water for agriculture at times and places where we weren't doing that before. This is, of course, the food side, but also on the other side, on the other water uses for fiber, for fodder, for bioenergy, you see similar increases, even probably more than the increase for food itself. And there's a dark horse, which is bioenergy, and that goes up and down. Depends very much on the the oil price, etc., etc. And it also depends very much on how we are able to develop the technology around biofuels. But if biofuels would really be an important source of energy in the future, then definitely this would have a dramatic impact on the water use. Yeah. So yes, demand is not going to go down, demand is going to go up. Yeah. But on the other hand, in many areas we have reached the limits. I mentioned groundwater, the importance of it, but also if you now would do an accountancy exercise all over the world, what we would see is that we use 20% more water than is being replenished, basically. So that's on the groundwater side. But all over the world we see, increased areas under water stress. We see that urban development and industries are sometimes reallocated. I've seen it a lot in China. We see also that drinking water systems sometimes fail because of water resource management. And we have, although we don't have the water wars that were predicted at one stage, but there's a lot of water-related insecurity in many fields, in many areas where you have rich water resources. I mean, it's like what people say, the resource curse, the water curse is there as well. They are often contested. And what this means, just to make the point that this is just not a sort of, fancy thing. We have areas where, because of overuse of water, people get stigmatized. This is an area where, in India, fluoride levels increased because they were using deeper groundwater in this case. And this whole village was like a hospital. Everybody was suffering from health problems related to the higher fluoride intake they were having. And what was worse, the whole village was stigmatized. Nobody wanted to marry a girl from that village. Yeah, we have water refugees. Yeah, if you go to Yemen, of course, Yemen is also in the news for all the, to be honest, unnecessarily, violence and warfare. But what we also have is that in some of the coastal areas, the water resources have been affected so much that people had to leave these areas. Water conflicts, and this is something I think we should all know of, and we should all very much, be aware of it. This is happening, and this is Palestine. Palestine, of course, still part of Israel, but the people of Palestine are really being deprived in so many ways by the Israeli government, and this is one of the ways where a huge wall is built around the city of Qalqilia, and this is happening in many places. It's like the Berlin Wall, and it basically means that you don't allow farmers there access to water resources unless they take an enormous detour and get out of the city through one of the gates, and then it becomes almost impossible to farm. So the conflicts are really happening, not maybe open wars, but definitely very serious water conflicts with serious implications. Now, what is on the positive side, and it's very important that although we see all this increased stress of water resources, which translates in refugees, conflicts, diseases, like we just saw. We also have a lot of opportunities to do things better, and it's not only water security, also food security and energy security. There are a lot of things that we can do to get it right. And the point I want to make, although I'll focus really on the water management issues, is there are maybe 10 huge solution areas, and they all will have their effect, a positive effect on water security and food and energy security. For instance, you'll see that here one of the solutions is bridging the yield gap. In many areas, farming is not using the best techniques around, or even the best feasible techniques around. And that often means that we don't produce much and that our water productivity is quite low. So if we would address this, then we could produce more with less water, basically. So that's an example. Another one here is reducing food loss and waste. Globally, a lot of the food which is produced is lost in post-harvest process, but also in the consumption chain. And the estimate is 15 to 20%. So that estimate, that loss basically means that we've produced crops and used water, and we're not using it. So here there's another massive area where we could, as a global community, do a lot better. Now, what I would like to focus on in this presentation, which again I'm really happy, and I hope your meeting is going well, was to focus on blue water management, but first also on green water management. What's the difference? Green water management is all the water which is contained in the landscape, in the soil, and the blue water is what we see in lakes and rivers and this type of thing. So groundwater. So first on green water management. What I would like to introduce to you is a very powerful concept which is being applied with good results in many parts of the world, called 3R. 3R stands for recharge, retention, and reuse. Basically, you try to keep water in the landscape, and you create a strong water buffer in the landscape. And we say that basically you try to extend the chain of uses. So that's the reuse part as well. So you recharge it, you keep it in the landscape, either in reservoirs or in groundwater or in soil moisture, and then you try to retain it as long as possible, and then reuse it as much as possible. So basically, it's like an economy. If your chain of uses is very long, your economy is very strong, actually. And if you look at an area, you'll see so many techniques, and different techniques, they make sense in different areas. But what is important is to do it at scale and at high density, not to do one storage or one recharge activity in one place, but to do it very intensively. Like I mentioned, there are many techniques in many different areas. I mean, in arid areas, the different techniques from semi-humid areas. But generally what you see is some techniques really do well in one place, and they're very common and popular, but they're not used elsewhere. And I want to show you some of these things, and maybe I can't judge, some of them are very common in Colombia, but some might not be, and they might be worth considering. And like I mentioned, we gave our email address, and I hope for two things: that if you have great examples to share, I really would be happy to see those. But on the other hand, also don't hesitate to ask for more details on some of the techniques that I want to show you. So in the landscape, basically you can retain the water as groundwater. You can retain it in the soil profile. And then you can also keep it in open water bodies or in closed water bodies. What's important to do it at high intensity. If you do that, it will control erosion area, it will increase water levels, and it will change the microclimate. I'll come back to it later. Microclimate is something we don't pay enough attention to. And I think it's very much related to water management. I'll come to that. There's so many processes whereby retaining more water in the area by intensive water harvesting, also by regreening, by revegetating the area, we can have fantastic effects on the water buffer in the area, and not only the water buffer, also on the soil temperature, on the effect of wind, on the presence of dew, and I think we really need to move to an area or an age where we are managing the microclimate, and I think that will be a major answer to addressing climate change. Some examples, of things that have happened over the years. Here, for instance, in Tigray, in Ethiopia, a large number of techniques have been used in a fairly rapid time, where erosion was controlled, water was recharged, was retained in the landscape, gullies which were there were closed. And what is fascinating, if you look at an area like this, this picture I've taken myself, then I asked the people there, I said, wow, this is an amazing piece of work. How long did it take you? They said, this is what we did last year. So if you calculate what a person can do in a day, and if people work, and this is the system in Ethiopia, 20 to 40 days on such activities, and you multiply it by the number of people, then you really get into a substantial workforce. And you can do these things. You can change the landscape. This is from China, from the Lus Plateau. One of the most fragile areas in the world, but also upstream of the Three Gorges Dam. So throughout this area in China, they have been constructing water harvesting structures to control the sediment, because that would also fill up the Three Gorges Dam, obviously, but also to turn this into productive landscapes. And one of the techniques they did was to retain soils behind such structures, and then you would build up a terraced landscape just from the managed sedimentation. Also, what I think is really interesting and an important area is all this water harvesting and water buffering. We also need appropriate mechanization for it, small bulldozers, etc., etc. China has done that. Again, on this concept of keeping water in an area, this is probably one of the more interesting irrigation systems that you might have seen, because this is a irrigation weir. It's called a KT weir in India, Maharashtra, with no outlet. The water is ponded up, but it's not channeled into any irrigation canal. Rather, what is being done, it's ponded up, and then it fills all the aquifers upstream of it. And then at the end of the rainy season, the gates of the stop locks on this structure are opened. By the way, the structure also doubles up as a bridge. And then, of course, the water is drained, but also it flushes the sediment and takes it downstream. I often say that, I once had a sort of, I was in a place where I had this sort of feeling I was in heaven, and there was this place, in Yemen, in a grape orchard. Grapes use a lot of water, and the grapes were about to be harvested. Delicious, beautiful. It was amazing day. But basically, what was most amazing was to realize that this was all grown without any irrigation, in a very arid area. Basically, these grapes are, of course, supplied with groundwater, but the groundwater wells are immediately recharged, because in the rivers, the river is, the floods in the rivers are slowed down by these structures. They call them cascade weirs, cascade check dams, and so they slow down the force of the flood water and encourage the water to recharge, and this feeds the aquifer, which then sources the grapes. Some techniques which I think also are really worth considering: subsurface dams which are buried in the riverbed. They retain the subsurface flow, which in semi-arid areas often is half of all the water, and they keep it in the area, and it can recharge wells. It can revigorate the vegetation and others. Yeah. The next step up is a sand dam. Yeah. So a sand dam is a structure where basically you create an artificial aquifer. You see it here. Yeah. You build it up, preferably in steps. Yeah. You make sure that the coarse sediment after a flood is retained after this structure. Yeah. And not the fine sediment. Yeah. But more the gravels and the sands, because they have a lot of storage capacity. And then after you've created that, artificial aquifer, the water will be stored, and because of the nature of that sediment package, it will not evaporate so quickly. So you can again feed wells from it, and you can, as you see in this picture, and also it will increase the vegetation around it. Another thing I want to highlight is that roads. I mean, all over the world, the estimate is $1 to $2 trillion is being invested in roads. This is massive. Yeah. However, the roads are at present often built just to, take people and commodities from one point to the next point. But roads have a major influence on the landscape. They act as embankments, as dikes, or as drains. Yeah? And if we think of that, and we can turn it into a benefit. Yeah, and that benefit is that we can feed surface water storages, we can feed recharge wells, etc., etc. Again, we've worked on such programs, and of course, it depends very much on the area. Every area has a different sort of click, but the possibilities of increasing the productivity of the area by systematically using the roads to collect water, is tremendous. So it's not just the road surface; it's the road body which influences the runoff. And then this is what can happen. We often talk about water as disappearing, and it's under pressure, and groundwater tables dropping, and this is an area which is in the same area where this road water harvesting was done, and other landscape measures. So water is retained, and actually groundwater tables in this case, they come up, but they were never existing before. And this is really an important message. Yeah, the message is that we can create new water sources. Yeah? We don't need to think that we're only under pressure, and need to sort of, at least make sure we don't lose the battle, but we can even create new battles and win them. Again, I really want to move a little bit further on this. And if we recharge landscapes, of course, one of the things is that the sediment can clog the soil. And in this picture, you have a very small engineer, and what he does, it's a soap buck. In real life, it is a few millimeters big. The soap buck, it burrows into the soil. It takes the fine sediment which clogs and seals the soil down, and it takes up the sand. And in this way, this is from Iran, you can keep recharging the area using the soap buck. So I think this is a marvelous example of a sort of biological measure to increase the recharge. And I think also this is a frontier in 3R to make more use of these biological measures. I already mentioned microclimate. Basically, if we do 3R, if we buffer the water, if we keep water in landscape by working at high intensity, then we change the whole microclimate. It's very simple. If there's more water in the landscape, you won't have the extreme temperatures, either high or low, because it will be evened out by the availability of moisture in the landscape. But there's so many other processes which I mentioned, but two I want to highlight. If you have more moisture in the landscape, then almost everywhere the fixation of nitrogen will be better. And if the fixation of nitrogen will be better, and that is because the soil biota are more active in a moist environment. So if that natural nitrogen fixation is better, then we don't need the same amount of fertilizers. So we might not need them at all. So I think that is a really an important one. The other thing, which we often forget, is the effect of capillary rise. If we recharge an area and we feed the aquifers the soil moisture, of course it will go down, but then usually after a while, when it gets a little bit colder, then often you see through capillary rise that this moisture which has gone down, it comes up again in the root zone. And so this is actually a second form of you could say, irrigation almost. So it's not a sort of one-time thing, but once the water is in the landscape, is in the soil, through capillary rise over time, not immediately, it might come to the surface again. And this actually helps to secure water availability. Like I said, this is the last thing I want to say on 3R. We need to do that scales. It's our collective responsibility. And these things work better not if you do an isolated thing, but if you do it, throughout the area. And I understand in Colombia promising things are happening, and it is really encouraging to do more of that. Let me move to blue water. That was the second area where we can do a lot. There's a lot of techniques that we can use for water saving. A lot of techniques. Of course, we all know center pivot systems, drip systems, sprinkler systems. But there's much more than this type of micro irrigation. There's a large range of measures that can be done, and even micro irrigation brings more than water saving. This is an example of a typical micro irrigation system with a centrifugal pump and a mixing unit. So with drip systems in this case, which are being supplied from this thing which is connected to the pump, you can add fertilizer, and the beauty of it is you have to use less fertilizer and you get same results. So also, from that point of view, it saves on inputs, it saves on labor, and also with drip and micro irrigation, but also all the other water saving measures. They don't just save water, but also they increase yields and often the quality of crops. I'll go into all the different examples. And why is that? Because if you do very precise irrigation, you will not have the same amount of pests and diseases, for instance. I worked in India, and the peanut yield went up tremendously after people started to use sprinklers because they had less fungi in their peanuts. But I think also we should not just focus on these, efficient irrigation techniques only. Another thing which I really think is important is to increase the moisture holding capacity of the soil, because if we can retain more moisture in the soil, then we don't need to apply the same amount of water. So in some areas there are natural red soils, clay soils. If we can mix them with the sandy soils, the water holding capacity increases a lot. Of there's zeolite, which is a volcanic clay, and it has a very special chemical structure. It is positive, and that's why it attaches both water and attaches also fertilizer. So if you apply it and you mix it with the soil, then you will have to use less water in the long run, and also even less fertilizer. Another thing that we really like is water pads. These are biodegradable polymers. So basically, this is like a small pad. It's maybe in this case 3 centimeters in diameter. It has dry polymers in it, like we have here. And then if you add water, it can, 7 grams of polymer can absorb 1 kilogram of water. So, so if you add this underneath a tree, underneath a huge vegetable plant, it will have its own little water buffer, and the cost of this is really very low, and that's the beauty of it, and it will help to secure water, and particularly, for instance, if you want to plant trees in a semi-arid area where you're not always sure you have the right quantities of water available, this will definitely help you over that bottleneck. I mentioned also biofertilizer. There's different types of biofertilizer, liquid and solid, etc., etc. What they do, they improve the soil structure, but also the moisture holding capacity. And the beauty is, again, that you can use waste material, organic material, you fermentate it, you add sugar, yeast. You can also use some rock dust. There's different types of rock dust that can even come from crusher, so you can crush it yourself. And they will add a lot of minerals to the soil. So the production can be on individual level, or it can be a small plant, or it can be huge plants as well. Taking to the measures for water saving, this is from China, where at least 7 million hectares, if not more, that's the last figure, but it's an outdated figure, is covered with this type of plastic. And the important thing is that you should really go for the biodegradable ones. Otherwise, you have a lot of plastics in your soil, and you might remove it, but it's always hard to remove all of it. So the biodegradables they will avoid that. So if you use this type of plastic mulch, which are very thin polyethylene sheets, you will reduce the soil evaporation. So, particularly you can put drips under it. Yeah, you will use far less water, but also you can regulate the soil temperature. Particularly, if you have colored ones, then if they're black, they will, absorb the heat, and in cold areas, it means you can increase the soil temperature much higher. Also, what I've seen being done, these ones, they're put over furrows, and there's always some soil evaporation, and that then sort of touches the plastic, yeah, the mulch, yeah, and then that is enough, that moisture, to accelerate the germination of crops. And the Thalia tray is somewhat similar, yeah. This is a tray you plant, you use it around the tree. It costs about $2-3, yeah. And basically what it does is, here that's used with drips, but you can also use it without drip systems. The Thalia tray will reduce the soil evaporation, yeah, and suppress weed growth around the plant, really important. But also because they've added some aluminium to the plastic, in areas where you're close to the dew point. The dew point is reached when the temperature drops and the soil saturation, the atmosphere moisture saturation, then starts to produce dew. Yeah, these Thalia trays can also collect dew for you. Now, to get all these things moving, yeah, one is to have these technologies, and many of them are new. Many of them we are not yet using. Yeah. But we need to create the right incentives as well. So one way is, you could say through the pocket, encouraging people through what they pay for water to move towards adopting more water-saving technology. And the other way is more on the social side, by creating awareness and a sort of collective responsibility for proper water management. I'll discuss both of that briefly. This is the first example, Jiangsu County in Jiangxi province in China, but there are several such exercises, quite successful, very impressive, where, and you can see it in the hand of the person, people have a swipe card. With that they activate the pump, and that immediately relates to what they pay for the water. They have a quota. If they exceed the quota, they pay more per unit of water. And this system has been very much instrumental in people adopting better water management practices. The adoption rate of water-saving technologies went up with from 20 to 68%, for instance. A large range of different things. Also, what is interesting is that if you don't use your quota, you can also swap it or even trade it with others. A different way, yeah, a more, you could say, social approach towards water management and encouraging people to adopt water saving measures is what's being done in India, in Andhra Pradesh. And these pictures are from there, where there's been some substantial exercise to have farmers analyze the sort of water source system in their area, making a huge map with colored powder. I mean, it's just fun. It's just an exercise, but also a very important way of putting it on the agenda. At the same time, and you can see that on the site, people were measuring, in this case, the water tables. They also had small meteorological stations, and they would all combine that in sort of meetings in which they would discuss how much water do we have, and how much water are we planning to use if we add up all our individual plants. Then there was a sort of farmer field school. You see the lady holding the glasses and sort of saying, okay, water availability changed so much over the years, and we need to do what we can do within our resources, otherwise we all suffer, and at the end of the season all our fields fall dry. Now this has been really interesting, the uptake, because in all the areas where there was a water shortage, the uptake has been enormous, and things got back into balance. This brings me to the topic of subsidies. I mean, I think often what you see in water management, subsidies are really aligned in the wrong direction. And in so many countries, and that also includes the United States and Europe, farm subsidies are tremendously important in the income of farmers, and agriculture being the largest water user, we really need to retool subsidies towards proper water management. In the country where I'm from, the Netherlands, farm subsidies can be equivalent to 40 to 70%. You can see it's 60, but even 70, 80% in some areas of net farm income. So it's really important, and it comes in different shapes. I think in subsidies for crops, in energy prices, which sometimes encourages pumping or different uses, in price guarantees for certain crops. This is very common in India, where particularly the high water consumption crops are supported by price guarantees. So we need to direct subsidies, and financial systems towards proper water management. It's a no-brainer, but unfortunately, because of all type of inertia and vested interest and what have you, this is not always the case. In Yemen, for instance, we calculated, we did an extensive study, that there the energy subsidy per hectare amounts to more than $1,000. So if you would introduce conveyance systems, underground pipes, then the water you would save, and hence the pumping you would not need to do, with these conveyance systems, if you would subsidize half of the price of some conveyance systems, you could earn it back with the reduced energy subsidies, and not energy cost, energy subsidies within a single year. So we need to subsidize efficiency, we need to subsidize ecological services, we need to subsidize recharge, not overuse of water, not over pumping. This is a picture to highlight it. In India, massive support is given, massive support, to guarantee the minimum price for rice and wheat, and they are the crops that use a lot of water. Other crops like coarse grain sorghum or pulses don't have that support at all. So this is where we need to make a big change. Some recommendations, particular maybe, and also more in general to the situation in Colombia. And here I quote work which was done recently on groundwater governance. Yeah? But the principles apply to water governance as well. This was an exercise in 5 continents where people, identified issues and came up with solutions. And I encourage you to look at those documents. It's at groundwatergovernance.org. There were 4, main principles really which were done, and I think, they make a lot of sense. Yeah, they're almost too obvious sometimes. Yeah, yet, yeah, if we look in the mirror, then we see we often don't do these things. First is that there should be public guardianship and collective responsibility for water management. Yeah, and things should just be done. On Colombia, I remember a book, a short story by your great writer Marquez, where he describes the Magdalena River, and he describes the story of a friend of him. He makes a journey back into the past. He lived, of course, along the river, and as a kid he used to go with a small steamer to his school, and then he describes how he makes a sentimental journey and goes back on the same river by boat rather than by car or plane. And then he sees the river is so polluted. And then he describes a story of a friend of him who he said wasted the first half of his life by making a big master plan for the river, yeah, which was never implemented. And then threw away the other half of his life because he was so disappointed that nothing was happening, that he drowned himself in the same river. So I really think it's a matter of taking responsibilities and doing things. Yeah, it's very simple actually, but often I think we get stuck in discussions and in big meetings and making plans and not implementation. Second thing is, it's very important to have, for effective management, to have engagement of stakeholders also at local level. I think the examples from India and China that were shown in the end underline this. Yeah? And if we manage water resources, we also need to manage them at local level, where people's behavior and actions really make a difference. The third point, again, which came from the shared vision, which was launched this year, was adequate and shared knowledge is so important. Yeah? Adequate knowledge is often we really don't know what's happening, but also it should be shared. It should not be in huge databases which nobody accesses. We should make an effort to bring the knowledge to the people who will act upon it. And then we should not only look at the water domain, yeah, the narrow water domain. We should manage the linkages. Yeah, if you manage surface water, you should manage groundwater at the same time. If you manage groundwater, you should manage surface water. The examples from 3R show the second point. We need to harmonize with land management. Yeah, or with, for instance, road development is another important one. Then both quality and quantity needs to be managed. I think often we are a little bit better in quantity than in quality, but both of them are, sides of the same coin. You saw the example from the fluoride, stigmatized village, where because you overuse, you get a quality problem. Then we also need to think of managing our whole subsurface space, not only the landscape, but also what's beneath our land, our aquifer systems. Yeah? Not the groundwater levels, but also, mining, etc., can have a tremendous negative impact. But even can be turned into a positive impact on water management as well. Vertical integration, need to make sure all the levels are aligned, and then finally, also very important in managing the linkages, to integrate with macro policies. And this is where, for instance, the pricing and the support to certain crops under food security systems comes from. I think particularly for Colombia, from discussions I had with people, I think it's important also to create more and more diverse solutions. I think this is in many countries, but I understand Colombia is not an exception. There's many techniques which are not yet known, but they work well elsewhere. So why would they not work in Colombia, or at least it's worth trying. So I really think you should encourage diversity and innovation, and not go through standard systems where this often happens, where because of the budget, everybody has to follow certain guidelines and rules, and then we all have to do the same. But in the end, A, it's not appropriate to all situations, and B, we don't give room for new solutions. And I think really you should encourage a culture of creating your own solutions and build on that. I think also universities have a big role to play, and you need to create knowledge hubs within the curricula, within the research programs. It's really important. And I think often what we see with academic research is it's not solution oriented. It just states the problem, but it doesn't come with a solution. And this is really what we cannot afford. We need to realign the financial systems. I already mentioned it in the previous discussion. Yeah. But also create financial systems to promote innovation, to build up a new cadre of people with new ideas and a new sort of energy to deal with things. I want to highlight the waterchannel.tv and make use of it. It's something that in Meta we operate ourselves. It has more than 2,000 videos only on water, and all of them are on innovations and approaches which are really useful for Colombia, I sincerely believe. I really want to thank you for the attention, but I want to also, to continue a little bit with the recommendations. This is more on the knowledge side. Yeah. Again, we discussed blue water management and green water management, and this again I would like to emphasize. These are measures which are relatively very cost ineffective and highly effective in terms of the water. They stay in the effect on the microclimate, on soil fertility. So retain water in the productive landscape. Don't only focus on retaining water in surface reservoirs, but see the landscape as a reservoir, and it's an organic live reservoir which will have all these other effects. Use a wide range of techniques and try to do them at scale. I think we have been faced with some small scale implementation of water harvesting here and there, but we need to do it at an intensive scale. Then we really get a change. Similarly, to target water saving in agriculture with a broad range of co-optimizing solutions. I give the whole overview of techniques which are there, and they also create, apart from water saving, they can help you to control soil temperature and fertility. So they go beyond just water saving. Yeah. And put money, which is there, at those large game changers. We talk about the water crisis. We talk about larger water stress. That was also in this presentation in the beginning, and definitely it's true. But I think also we have many unused opportunities at hand to do it a lot better, and I think it's our responsibility to do that. We know the solutions are there, so we cannot ignore them anymore. With this, I really want to thank you for the time, for the invitation, and I wish you a very, very good meeting. The last picture I want to show is from Greece. Two springs which people considered holy. If you drink the water, that's what people say, if you drink that particular water, your worries will go away. So with this, I want to thank you on behalf of Meta, I mentioned we see our role as trying to promote better water management and do that with partners. And I hope to be in touch with you. And we also really believe in making knowledge publicly available, and hence you have a little overview of websites on water buffering, on flood-based farming, on groundwater management that which are available, and really hope they can be of benefit. Thank you very much for all your endeavors.